everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm at the Paleontology Lab, the part of the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, where we get to see some really cool fossils and all the exciting studies and research that's being done on Saskatchewan geological past. And I don't see anyone yet, but I see some really cool things. So let's take a look. Whoever. I see some paleontologists. Here we go. Hi Ryan, how are you?
Hi, good. Yourself?
Good. Welcome everybody. This is
Hello.
Ryan. This is Dr. Ryan McKellar. He is the curator of paleontology here at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. And I'm so excited that I get to talk to you today about what you do in your lab, all of the lab work you do, because I know that's a big part of your research.
Yeah, and a lot of this involves students. So one of the neat parts of working at the museum is that we have some of these larger scale projects the public see, but there are also a lot of people working behind the scenes on different aspects of this. The specimen that's laid out here is the plesiosaur. It's part of a larger scale project we're working on that involved students from McGill University. Actually, someone came out from McGill, did a lot of 3D scanning for this specimen, and then Kaylin, a student you'll meet a little bit later, has been doing a lot of the 3D reconstruction work and 3D printing. So we've got the actual bones and then the specimen, the print that we're getting ready for modeling.
That's awesome. So you said plesiosaur, right?
Yes.
So tell me, for those of us out here, I know what a plesiosaur is, but some might not. So what is a plesiosaur?
So a big, long-necked marine reptile. If you're trying to conjure up a mental image, something like the Loch Ness Monster isn't that far off the mark. And in this case, would have been swimming in the seas of Saskatchewan about 75 million years ago when we're underwater.
So all of these vertebrae make sense if you're long.
Yeah, basically all that you're seeing on the table here is neck for,
neck for miles?
Neck. If you start to get into rib cage further back here, so some of these have attachment points for ribs, but basically it's mostly neck, like 2/3 neck, and then big paddles that are sort of like oars on a turtle coming off the side, and a relatively stiff rib cage that sort of spans out sideways more than vertical.
That's awesome. So this specimen, there's so many pieces. Are all of the pieces going to be 3D scanned and then printed?
Yes, so we're missing some pieces, and some pieces need repairs. So sometimes you'll see bones that are missing pieces, like this one here. So a lot of the work that was done by the McGill team was coming back in and basically copying missing pieces from other bones and grafting them on to the ones that were missing.
So from other plesiosaurs that
No,
have been
mostly
found,
from within the specimen.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's always a little bit of interpretive work that goes into building models for exhibits. In this case, it comes down to mostly just tweaking some of the pieces we already have. This one is so complete that it's a relatively easy specimen to do this sort of project on.
That's great. And so you get to be part of all of this, but you were saying that graduate students are also lucky enough to be able to do some work on this type of project.
Yes, so Kaylin has been doing a lot of the work for the 3D printing. Behind me here, I don't know if Pierre wants to wave. Pierre is busily working away on Amber from Dinosaur Bone Beds. He's a PhD student that's working out of the museum and the University of Regina as well.
Oh, fantastic.
But yeah, if you guys want to come meet Kaylin, we can talk about some of the work that he's doing.
Absolutely. Let's go find him.
We had a question, if we could answer that on the way there.
Sure.
But while we're on the subject of aquatic animals, Olin would like to know which is bigger, a megalodon or a Spinosaurus?
Oh, geez. I think megalodon. But I think you're talking like total length, yes?
Let's go for length.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. There's some really cool pictures of some of the original descriptions where there are like teams of scientists sitting inside the mouth of some of these larger specimens.
Wow.
Of a megalodon.
Yes.
Ha, that's great.
That's great. Thank you.
Let's go meet a graduate student that's working on this. Fantastic. Hello. This is Kaylin.
Yeah, my name's Kaylin. And yeah, so I've been helping out with the 3D work, or the 3D printing work for the Pontaix plesiosaur. And so yeah, we've done most of the neck and the paddle. So what I've been doing, I got the 3D scanned files from the student at McGill, and I've been hollowing it out, making holes so that we can put wires through them, and yeah, just preparing the files so that they can be printed in the 3D printer downstairs. And yeah, so it's pretty much like building a life-size model kit. So I had to label each one of them with the which number it is in the vertebral column, because there's 66 of them. Easy to get them mixed up, especially in the middle. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing for the past, I think, month and a half now, and I've been working on other stuff too alongside, but that's been the bulk of the project so far.
Were you involved with any of the actual scanning of it, or was that all done when
The scanning was done by the student at McGill for this specimen.
And did they do it there, or did they come here to do that?
No.
Oh, yeah, so this was Alexander Demir Potvin. Actually, he's a doctor now.
Okay.
Sorry, master's. He finished his master's degree, but he's a PhD student now.
PhD student now, yes.
Yes, he came out from McGill and spent the better part of it, month and a half, going through each one of the bones with the wand scanner and creating a 3D model. We do our own sort of in-house smaller scale stuff with the laser scanner that's on the table over there. So what Kaylin's been doing is taking some of these smaller specimens and creating 3D models using a laser scanner. There are
Okay.
limits to the size of specimens that we can do this. The nice part about what Alexander was doing is that you could do larger specimens, specimens as big as Scotty's skull, in one go with this.
With a
scanner.
wand scanner.
Yeah.
So that's really cool that we have the ability to partner with other organizations so that we can all benefit from
Yeah.
the different technology that's available and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's great when you get to work together, when your interests overlap like that, and they're able to bring something that cool to the table.
And then when you're a master's student and you get to also work with that data, that's fantastic. And so that's what you've been able to do.
Yep.
That's great. What has been the most interesting part about working with these 3D scanning images for you?
I mean, I've always wanted to be a paleontologist since I was a kid, so just everything has been exciting.
Yeah.
I've actually been working on.
We can come over
Scanning.
closer and see what you've been doing here.
Yeah, sure. So I've been scanning some parts on the laser scanner that Ryan was talking about earlier, and this guy's named Mushy because apparently he looked very mushy when they found him. Yeah. So he's also another aquatic reptile, and so the skull would have looked something like that. This one didn't have a long neck; it was more just a big lizard with paddles on it. But so I've been just reconstructing and 3D scanning all the vertebrae individually. So yeah, that's been cool too.
Yeah. That's great.
Speaking still of aquatic animals, we had a question about the closest living relative of plesiosaurs. Peter has asked if it's true that turtles are the closest living relatives of plesiosaurs. And then as a follow-up question, are plesiosaurs descended from stem turtles?
The simple answer is no. I think a lot of these groups are more closely related to snakes and lizards than they are to turtles. Is the sort of short answer.
Closer to snakes and lizards. Cool. Okay.
So snakes and lizards. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that's cool.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this 3D scanning work before we move on to something else that's happening?
He's downplaying how much work he puts into it. Kaylin's been doing a lot of work reconstructing missing bits too, so it almost gets into artistry in terms of sculpting some of these pieces, and there's a lot of anatomical knowledge that goes with it. So it's fantastic having students with this sort of background and this sort of technical proficiency.
That's great. So, Kaylin, when you're doing that, is that hand drawing? Are you sculpting? How is that working?
It's on a 3D sculpting software called Blender, and it's like sculpting but on the computer. So, I mean, it took a while to get used to, but it's pretty fun once you get used to it and you can do it. So
that's great.
And yeah, I guess beyond that, in terms of the material that's going on this half of the lab, or the work that's going on this half of the lab, most of our research actually focuses on amber and things found in amber. So the specimen that's up on the screen here is part of the project that we're trying to wrap up this week on wasps from Burmese amber. So we talked about this a little bit in the teaser for the tour here, but it's a group of wasps called sophidids. They're sort of like the dinosaurs of the insect world. They went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. And they look a lot like ants in that they have a two-segmented waist. There's sort of a first segment and a second segment, and then you get into the abdomen. But they're really tiny. Most of them are like 1 or 2 millimeters long. This one's actually a giant at 3.4 millimeters long. So when people talk about big marine reptiles and things like that, yeah, it's a different
This is
frame
the
of reference. for
opposite
them.
side of
Yeah.
the spectrum, looking at these tiny, tiny insects.
Yes, but they're equally as interesting, and a lot of these groups seem to have disappeared around the time that flowering plants took over from conifers. So we get those sorts of ecological clues from the specimens. And the neat part of working on pieces of amber is that you get whole dioramas trapped. So it's not just this one little wasp in here. If we zoom out, oops, if I can get the microscope to work for me.
No rush.
There we go. So hiding in the same piece of amber, there's a little bark close. And if we cruise around, basically those layers or lines that you're seeing are actually flow lines in the amber. So each one of them is like a little episode where it captured a different insect or a different fragment of an insect.
That's really cool.
Powdery stuff is actually wood dust or powder from trees.
I'm just going to back you up one little tiny bit,
Please
just
do.
in case. If somebody does not know what amber is, can you do a quick explanation?
Fossilized tree resin. So if you've ever cut a pine or spruce and got stuff on your hands that just doesn't wash off, that's resin. It's not what the plants use for food. It's not sugar rich like syrup. Instead, it's a defense chemical.
Right.
And if you leave it out long enough, it hardens, turns into turns into amber. The stuff that people are more familiar with are probably things like rosin for violins or gymnasts.
Oh,
So
yes.
the dried
Sort of
out
that
leftovers.
sticky, like.
Yeah,
like-
it's powdery stuff that has a little bit of tack to it still.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
So, but this makes for a great way to collect insects, and that's not something that you generally see in other types of fossils very often.
Yeah, so you'll get rare lake deposits that will have insects in them. So British Columbia actually has some really great lake deposits that have 45 or 50 million year old insects in them.
Cool.
But usually you have to trace like venation in the wings and things like that to figure which groups you're dealing with.
Right.
In amber, you get to see everything in 3D. You can look at the finest details and structures. And sometimes you even get colored patterns and things like that preserved.
That's fantastic. Where is this amber from?
This is a specimen from Burmese amber, so it's about 99 million years old. And it's part of a large-scale project that we're working on with the American Museum of Natural History and the University of Kansas to sort of cover this group of wasps, or part of this group of wasps. They're really diverse as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you do actually work with amber that's from Saskatchewan too. So Saskatchewan also has amber fossils.
Exactly. So we're sort of in the beginning stages, a lot of the research in Saskatchewan, but places like the Big Muddy Badlands down by Bengoff have their own little amber suites. Actually, you've been out in the field with me.
I have,
once,
yes. I've been lucky enough to do that.
Yeah,
Yes.
you found one of the best sites actually for some of the work in the province here. And we're usually lucky if we get pieces of amber that are a centimeter or so across, but it's still enough to capture this sort of material, this sort of inclusions or things trapped in the amber.
Right. And beyond insects, are you seeing other things that are of interest and value?
Yes. Yeah, so we get insects, we get plant material. Sometimes if we're really lucky, we get fragments of things like feathers or spider webs that paint pictures of other animals that aren't, we don't necessarily get the whole body, but we get little glimpses of them.
Right.
And that's been one of the fun things about working on Canadian amber is that we find material in places like dinosaur bone beds, and that's what Pierre is working on. And not only do you get some idea which group of plants were there, you also get to see the things that were living in the forest alongside the dinosaurs or in the habitat right next to the dinosaurs.
Right.
And all get washed into the same river.
So you're seeing a lot more about the whole picture of the environment of
Yes.
when dinosaurs were living in Saskatchewan.
Exactly. And some of these really fine details that you just wouldn't see preserved anywhere else. So you get to sort of look at it through a new lens.
That's really cool. So I have a question. What is your favorite thing that you've ever found in amber? Do you have a favorite, or is that too difficult?
One of the coolest we found so far was a fragment of a dinosaur tail from Burmese amber. So
Right.
that one was pretty popular.
Of course, a
Honestly,
dinosaur
though,
tail.
Yeah. Some of the weird associations are even more fun, though. We've had some specimens where there's like a bract of needles, like a cluster of needles from one of these Metasequoia-like trees.
Oh, okay.
Almost like
Yeah.
a redwood, but
Yeah.
living back then.
Yeah.
And there are insects on the needles, on the plants. So you basically get that whole picture in
You're
one
seeing
piece.
like a little ecosystem happening right there,
Exactly.
right in the amber captured.
Yeah, and they all have their own little mysteries, and it's like getting to be a detective on a longer timeline. This specimen here that's on the screen has the bark close. There are also some flies in there. If we cruise around, there are legs from a fly up here. If we cruise a little further, these little fuzzy things, oops, up in the corner, are plant hairs, and some of them are little star-shaped things.
Yeah.
So they're called trichomes. They're little hairs. Sometimes they're distinctive. You can tell which group of plants left them behind.
Oh, great.
And if we cruise over to the other side, there are other small inclusions. Some of them will be bubbles, some of them will be other insects. But they all have their own little additions to the story.
Great.
And if you can interpret those flow lines, you can actually tell what came first if they're in the same habitat at the exact same time.
Great.
All sorts of fun stuff.
And you also do chemical work on
Yes.
this type of thing.
Yeah, so it allows us to, we can look at the chemistry of the amber, figure out which groups of trees produced them, so what forest was on the ecosystem at the time, or on the habitat.
Yeah.
And then we can look at things like isotopes in the amber, or in the material that's left behind, to figure out what rain patterns look like, or what tree stress looked like at that time. So we get a little snapshot where it's not just
That's
the insects,
amazing.
it's all these other facets.
So there's so much that you can learn from this little tiny bit of amber that was left behind.
Yeah, and Saskatchewan has a really cool record, and then we get the last part of the Cretaceous right before the extinction event. So we can look at what's happening in insect communities as you head towards the extinction event, and to some extent even beyond it. So it's a cool place on Earth.
That's important. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it fills in a really big gap in our understanding of the fossil record of insects.
Awesome. So I'm just going to remind our viewers that if you have questions, you're welcome to type them in. And if you happen to be watching this after it's happened, it's no longer live, you're still welcome to send us a question. We'd love to try to find the answer for you.
Speaking of, Sumer would like to know what species or genus is the plesiosaur laid on the table? You have the specific scientific name for it?
Terminodentator.
I'll just swing around. Sorry about that. Having camera troubles. Sorry about that. Could you repeat it one more time?
Terminodentator contactiensis.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
The last swimmer, not Terminator.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
That's not as exciting.
No, although we have some pictures where we get a little flashlight in the eye hole, it makes for some pretty compelling.
Perfect. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing this, Brian. Maybe we should go see who else is working.
Yes,
on the
we
lab.
have a question from Effie, but I feel like it would be better to get it answered further on down.
All right.
If that's all right.
All right, here's some more of the lab. And I found some more friends working too. So here I have Wes Long. Wes is a curatorial assistant here at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and it looks like you're pretty busy.
Yeah, working on a Mosasaur.
Mosasaur. Okay, so we had a plesiosaur
Yeah.
out there. Now this is a Mosasaur, which is this type of.
Yeah, that's one right there.
So another marine reptile.
Yes, and a very large one too. This one would have been over 7 meters in length.
Wow.
We collected pretty much the entire skeleton. I think it's missing one front paddle. And we collected it back in 2003 in conjunction with the University of Alberta. And this one's nicknamed Max the Mosasaur.
Max.
And it's named after Aaron Maxwell, the U of A student who discovered it while we were out prospecting.
Where was this found? In southern Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So what is this piece that you are working on here?
So I'm working on some of the tail vertebrae. So on this map here, this highlighted green area, that's the very end of the tail, and that was in this field jacket here. So I've been slowly removing the vertebrae and separating them and cleaning them all up. And they also have these chevrons, which are attached to the attach on, like that. And there are
Okay.
spines that hang down from the bottom of the tail. So if you look right behind you, those are the bones that I've prepared already from the tail.
Oh, I see the pieces that are coming off of the.
So these are the neural spines. That's along the top edge of the tail. And so if we pop this out, you can see that little hole. That's where the spinal cord would have gone through.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So you said you're removing them. What do you mean by that? Like,
I'm taking them out of the jacket and prepping them one by one. Some of them are fused together and I can't get them apart. These two
is
here,
that like with rock fused
Yeah.
together in the rock?
so these are fused together, but I'm going to try and separate the two. There's kind of a bit of a shift there, and I want to straighten the tail out as much as possible. So I basically go in there, I use water and squirt it into the space in between, and that helps soften. There's a lot of gypsum crystals holding it together, so that helps soften it. Also softens the shale that's on it, and then I go in with the scalpel and slowly pick away at it, and I'll work my way all the way around between the two vertebrae, and then I'll take a chisel and I'll put it in between, and I'll give it a slight tap, and hopefully it'll just pop apart.
So right now you're using some really detailed tools, like small tools, like the scalpel and a little tiny pick. But sometimes when you're doing this preparation work, you could be using a very big tool.
Yeah, so after I get the tail finished on this, I'm going to be moving on to the skull. And the skull is probably going to take me over 2 years to prepare.
Wow.
Because the skull, this is a sample of some of the material that the chest block is in. And it's solid ironstone.
Ironstone.
So I'll be going in with these tools over here, which are air scribes. They're pneumatic tools. They're air-powered chisels. And basically they vibrate the rock away from the bone. And the trick is the bone's going to be softer than the rock. So
you have to be super careful with what
super,
you're doing.
super careful, and constantly soaking the bone with a glue called Vinac. And basically Vinac is, here we go, I can dump some out. And they're little plastic beads.
Okay.
And we dissolve them with acetone. And the acetone helps the glue penetrate into the bone. And then these Vinac beads are basically plastic. And then the acetone evaporates and leaves the plastic inside and on a plastic coating on the outside of the bone, protecting it. So we can mix it to any thickness that we like. There's some super thick for
Depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing. So I'll constantly be working my way around the skull block, picking out areas. I'll work on one area for a bit. If it starts to destabilize, hit it with glue, move over to the next, and constantly working my way around the block. And it's going to be a tricky block to work on because it's going to weigh about probably close to 600 pounds.
So how are you moving that kind of thing around? I know you're strong, but it's like, that's...
Yeah, we'll figure
work
it out.
together, yeah.
Whereas
Many hands make light work.
the rest of the skeleton, like this was a really neat one to excavate because it was under very, very shallow. The deepest part of the dirt or matrix over top was about as high as this table. But this tail had like literally about that much dirt over top of it. So we have the whole skeleton. It's articulated, it's laid out the way it died, and it didn't get jumbled up except in the gut area here. And when we were excavating it, we couldn't figure out why is it sort of disarticulated there. But then we started to find sharks deep in there. So sharks must have been feeding on the carcass and mixing up the bones of it.
So this is the yummiest part right here in the stomach?
The tastiest part, the softest part.
So when you are taking things out of the jacket is something that you were putting on to this fossil in the field.
Yeah, this would have been put on in the field. And what it is, we uncover the bone. And then we put tissue paper over top. We uncover one side of the bone. We leave it in the earth.
Okay.
We put tissue paper over top of that. We soak it down so it's nice and tight to the bone. That acts as your separating layer. Because then what we do next is we have strips of burlap all cut up into strips about that long and that wide.
Yeah.
And we mix up plaster of Paris. And we put a cap over top and bandage it all up. Then we undercut it. We dig underneath that part. And then we plaster that undercut. And we cross our fingers and we flip the whole thing over.
With just a little bit still not covered. And then
hopefully you take a fair bit of matrix because you don't want the specimen to fall out of the bottom of the jacket when you're flipping it. And then we gut the block. So we literally get in there with knives and trowels and stuff and we scrape down and get as close to the bone layer as we can. Because these jackets can weigh literally thousands of pounds.
So you don't want extra material
Yeah,
if you can
You want to
avoid
take
it.
as little dirt as you can.
Especially
out of
this
it.
heavy ironstone.
Yeah, with those ones we had no choice. It was
You can't just scrape it down, yeah.
It was kind of funny. The skull block was actually sticking out of the ground
Because it
And-
wasn't being eroded because it was
because it
ironstone.
was ironstone.
Of course.
And so it was just a case of plastering up this great big block of ironstone. We knew the skull was in there, not only because the skeleton was articulated, but the end of the block got knocked. We knocked it off, and we could see the snout.
Oh, goodness.
So we plastered up the skull. It took about, I think it was about 8 or 9 of us to lift it off the ground and get it into the back of the truck.
Yeah.
And
Fossils aren't always found in the most convenient
no,
places,
no, not at all.
are they?
and we had one-time permission to take the truck in there to load up the skull.
Yeah.
And so we weren't driving all over the pasture where it was found.
Oh my goodness.
And so we had to hike everything, all our plaster and all that. You had 50-pound bags of plaster on your back and hiking over.
So you're super healthy and in shape through the summer work, right?
Well, back then I was. That was 17 years ago. So.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it's going to be nice to see this specimen wrapped up.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's a beautiful specimen.
Is this part of it for you?
Actually, that's part of the plesiosaur you were looking at.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There. So as I was talking about using pneumatic tools to remove the rock, that's what I was doing on this one too. I'll just cut in front of you here.
Certainly.
And so I was using primarily this mid-range air scribe. So it's got a little carbide chisel on there. And the air forces it to vibrate. And you can see all these little marks in the rock. Those are caused by the air scribe chipping away the
okay.
rock. But this is a really interesting block because this is right in the gut region of the plesiosaur. And these are gastroliths. So this is a
So
stomach stone.
gastrolith, tell me about a gastrolith.
Well, those are like there's like a gizzard. on it.
Right.
Yeah. So, and so they were swallowing.
So
these
swallowed to help with digestion
stones. Yeah.
or like,
ballast and
yeah,
all that
weight.
stuff.
Yeah.
And so this one has all the stomach stones are in place. So I didn't want to remove too much of the rock. When I flipped it over, the other side is much prettier. It's got the stomach stones are all in place with the ribs all nice in a line. But we hadn't seen the other side of this in a long time, so we flipped it over and wanted to get as much of it cleaned up for the 3D scanning process.
Right.
And I didn't want to take too much rock off because it would destabilize the gastrolith.
Right, and this tells an interesting story on its own
Yeah.
without being taken apart. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
much so. So on this one, you can see there's these are the processes that come off the side of the vertebrae where the ribs are attached. Here's a bunch of ribs that have drifted over. So the
Okay.
spine, there's that where the spinal cord would have been, just as I pointed out on the Mosasaur I'm working on. So the neural spine, like the bumps on your backbone, that's your neural spine.
Yeah.
And so there's the neural spine on this guy. So the ribs had all kind of drifted over and were stacked over here, and there's a couple more over here.
That's really cool.
So this, I believe, would have been the side that was turned face up in the field when it was found. So
Okay.
the other side was down, so there wasn't as much shifting around
Right.
of the ribs and stuff. So they're all kind of in sequence.
Oh, that's really
But,
interesting.
yeah, it's a pretty cool piece.
Cool. Was there a question that would be good now, or?
Sure. It can even be a segue for our other expert in the room. But Effie at home would like some information on becoming a paleontologist. What advice do you have for someone who is interested in the field of paleontology? Wes, we could certainly segue.
I can talk about the lab aspect and getting experience in the lab.
Well, here we have Emily. This is Dr. Emily Bamforth. She's another curatorial assistant for paleontology at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. And I know you've been interested in paleontology for like your entire life.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that you could speak to the question of how does one become a paleontologist, or at least start doing some of that sort of studies.
Yeah, so I decided I was going to be a paleontologist when I was 4. More or less the first time I saw my first dinosaur, I was like, yep, that's what I want to do.
I love it.
So if you go to university for paleontology, the kind of the two disciplines that you need are geology, which is the study of rocks, and biology, which is the study of living things. Because that basically is what paleontology is. It's the study of living things in
And
rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of combinations you can do. My undergraduate work was in evolutionary biology. Evolution, of course, is a huge part of paleontology. And then I kind of got the geology part later. But there's other people that do the geology first, the biology. There's some people who do things in paleontology you wouldn't expect, like biomechanics or isotope geochemistry. So there's a whole bunch of different fields that kind of like circle around paleontology.
All science is interactive, right? Like one is not a wall and then there's the other.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. And I think kind of Wes was alluding to one of the best things you can do if you want to get into paleontology is to find volunteer opportunities to work either in a lab or to go into the field.
Absolutely. It sounds like things are pretty heavy, so you need to have those volunteers help lifting.
Yeah, so we use a lot of pickaxes and shovels and all that kind of stuff. So
Or just to help them carry your stuff out.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. And so I think if that would be kind of my number one advice would be, first of all, if you want to go to university for it, get those two core disciplines.
Yeah.
But also always look for volunteer opportunities. There's no real kind of equivalent from that you can get from a book.
Volunteer opportunities aren't easy during COVID, but after that, that'll be a better thing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So what are you working on here?
So actually, this is a good segue. So this is a horned dinosaur.
Okay.
So what we would call a Ceratopsian, and it's from Grasslands National Park. And it was actually brought to our attention by a volunteer who was out with us,
Fantastic.
kind of looking around, helping us excavate a fossil, and then he was just kind of wandering the hills
I
and
found something.
he found this, which is the tip of a horn core. So a horn core is the bone that's inside the Ceratopsian horn.
Okay.
Probably just like sticking out of the ground.
Did you know right away what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This
like
is
it's pretty obvious.
Pretty
Yeah.
distinctive.
Yeah.
And so, because in Grasslands is a national park, we need a permit, special permit to collect. So we had to wait a year to collect this. And also this was collected in part by a volunteer public program in Grasslands National Park called Fossil Fever.
Right.
So a lot of this was collected also by volunteers.
That's fantastic.
And it's a very neat specimen. So what you're looking at is the front part of the face, the nose horn. This is the underside of it. So this Triceratops is like lying on its back.
Okay.
And this nasal horn, the nose horn, kind of fits with it right on the end like that. So this is kind of the bridge of its nose.
But lying out and looking. Yeah.
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 So the underside of the bridge of its
Okay.
nose. And it's kind of a giant jigsaw puzzle. All of these pieces go on here. So kind of like that. This is part of the beauty of fossil prep, is you actually have to take things apart to put them back together again.
So was this broken in the field, like when you found it, like it was in pieces, or how, or does it break up when you're trying to get it out of the ground, or a bit of both?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a picture of what it looked like when it was in the ground. So this is the other side of this that was first exposed.
Right.
And all of these, this little thing here, were all of these bones just jumbled up.
Okay.
And what's kind of fun and exciting about this particular specimen is that modern plants grew through it. Plants love fossils. Fossils are full of minerals that plants really like. So they grow into the bone, but unfortunately also break it apart.
Oh, of course.
And so a lot of these breaks are related to plant material kind of growing through it. So
Can you find fossils based on which plants are growing, or no?
some people swear you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so fossils are often found in sandy sediment. Plants like sand as well because water moves through it. So
Yeah.
Plants help us, but they also hinder us sometimes when we're collecting.
So now you said this is a horned dinosaur, but do you, like, when you say that, I think Triceratops.
Right.
You don't know for sure what
type of horned dinosaur this is?
Yeah, so that's the other really neat thing about this specimen is this comes from what we would call the Frenchman Formation,
Okay.
which is where most but not all of our dinosaurs in Saskatchewan come from. This group of rocks called the Frenchman Formation.
Right.
It's about 66 million years old. It's right before the dinosaur mass extinction. And most of the dinosaur fossils that come from the Frenchman Formation are Triceratops.
Okay.
So that really iconic, like three-horned face.
Yeah.
But this guy, we also have the frill that goes with it, which is what's in that.
It's all wrapped up like a present waiting.
Yeah. And there's something weird about the frill. It doesn't really say Triceratops, which is significant because the biggest difference between species of horned dinosaurs is their nose horn and their frill,
Okay.
or their three horns and their frill.
Yeah.
So if this is not a Triceratops frill, it means we're maybe looking at another incredibly rare species called Torosaurus,
That's amazing.
which we only have one frill in all of Canada. There's just one.
Was
frill
it
now.
found in Saskatchewan or is that-
near East End,
Yeah.
actually? Yeah.
Oh, cool. Saskatchewan has so many cool things.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, that's
So
neat.
yeah, this is just trying to put it all back together again.
That's great. So, this is one of the things you're working on. What other things are you working on?
So the other thing that I'm actually really interested in is fossil plants.
Okay.
Fossil plants are like just a treasure trove of information about the paleo environment. So this particular quarry actually had plant fossils in it, which was very exciting. Mostly roots, like fossil roots of fossil trees. that were
Okay.
Kind of like sort of sitting on top of the specimen. But I'm also interested in other Triceratops quarries that have plants associated with them, because that can tell us about the climate, but maybe also something about what the animals were eating or where they were
Absolutely.
living.
Yeah. It's all about the big picture. Like it's not just it's one dinosaur or it's one
Yeah.
animal, but rather what was the whole environment like at that time?
Yeah, it's a field called paleoecology,
Okay.
which is kind of the difference of how we do paleontology now versus how they did it like even 100 or even 50 years ago. Was the focus now is not necessarily just on the specimen, but we want to know how the animal lived, like what animals, other animals it lived with, like what environment it was living in, how it died, how it fossilized.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so like you said, we're looking for the bigger picture now.
And I suppose that learning about climate in the past can help us understand our climate now
Yep.
and like what changes are happening on Earth and
Yeah.
all of that as
It's-
well.
Especially from this time period, this is leading up to a mass extinction,
Right.
which is timely for us. So some of my research has looked at how biodiversity trends were changing 66 million years ago leading up to this mass extinction, as well as how plant communities shifted across the extinction boundary.
Oh, that's really interesting. And Saskatchewan you're able to actually look at both sides of that extinction boundary.
Yeah,
here
that's
in
actually what this
Saskatchewan.
is.
This?
So very conveniently. This is a section of what we call the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary.
Oh, cool.
So this is the Cretaceous part. This would be the post-dinosaurs, or what we call the Cenozoic part,
Okay.
or the Paleogene part. And that line, you can just about see it in here. This is the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary itself, which is, it's got an iridium-rich clay in it. And iridium is an extraterrestrial mineral. So wherever we find it on the surface on Earth, we know it comes from outer space. So that
Wow.
would be fallout from the bolide or the meteor impact.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And this is from Saskatchewan.
Yes, this is from just about 40 kilometers from East End.
That's so cool.
In a road cut, like you can just drive by it and find it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's exciting.
We have a quick question about the KPG extinction. Peter would like to know if North America still had an inland sea at the time of the extinction, or had it closed by then?
So the inland sea was still around. It's basically at its height covered all of the middle of North America, but it receded to the north and the south. And so at this time, there is still a sea in North America, but it's south of us. It's
Right.
kind of like in Montana, and they call it the Cannonball Sea.
Is it round like a cannonball?
It's full of rocks that look like cannonballs.
Oh.
Cannonball concretions are
Okay.
hence the name.
Interesting.
But yeah, so as far as we know, that sea that had receded south of Saskatchewan by the time, but only just.
Yeah.
Like we're still getting some coastal kind of animals.
Right.
Here.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. That's great. Any other questions?
Yes. Margaret says that her husband Earl Ray would like to know how many mass extinction events have happened on Earth.
So that's an excellent question. There are 5 of them that we know about. And I say that we know about because before things had bones and teeth, the fossil record gets a little less easy to read.
Yeah.
So there may have been mass extinctions prior to the first one that we know about. But generally we consider there to be 5.
Right.
The Cretaceous extinction would be the 5th, and many people say that now we're undergoing a 6th mass extinction. So if you've heard that term, that's what it refers to.
Right.
So the Cretaceous mass extinction generally was probably about the 3rd worst. The very worst mass extinction that we know of in Earth's history was the Permian mass extinction, and that took out about 95% of plant and animal life on the planet.
Wow. And do they have an idea of what was like the driving cause behind that mass extinction?
So basically, all of the mass extinctions that we know about in Earth's history have the same root cause, and that's ecological collapse.
Right.
So various factors were happening that caused the ecosystems to destabilize and basically collapse on themselves. The Permian mass extinction, it was a combination of climate change, mass volcanism, ocean acidification. So the oceans became very acidic,
Okay.
and things like clams and brachiopods, like their shells just dissolved.
Right. It's hard to live in that type of environment, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a snowballing of factors.
Oh, that's so interesting.
This extinction too, the bolide impact the meteor impact was kind of the main cause, but there were also other factors around that were happening at the same time. There were also
It could have been like a tipping point type of
yes,
thing.
yeah, or nail in a coffin. We say.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Is there any more questions?
That's all we've got. Oh, no. Dana has a question from her kids. Dana's kids would like to know what the first dinosaur ever discovered was.
So the first dinosaur. So it's kind of interesting that the term dinosaur was actually not coined until 1862. Really not that long ago.
No.
So the first dinosaurs that were formally described as dinosaurs were the iguanodon, so that's the one with the thumb spike,
Okay.
and another one called a megalodon, which was kind of like a big, like T-Rex-like dinosaur. It was
Okay.
actually not a T-Rex, but
Yeah.
similar kind of dinosaur.
Yeah.
So those would be the two, kind of the first two that were
Interesting.
formally described as dinosaurs.
Well, that's interesting. Where was the first dinosaur found in Canada?
In Saskatchewan. Actually, in Grasslands National Park, like within a stone's throw where this Triceratopsian was
Oh,
found.
fantastic.
Yeah, it was found by some geologists doing like mapping the 49th parallel as the border between Canada and the United States.
Yeah.
And they passed right through Grassland, which is right on the border. And they came across the first dinosaur fossil in Canada.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
What kind of dinosaur was it? Do we know?
It was some kind of duckbill dinosaur.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. Any more questions? Do feel free to send in a question if you are watching this after the fact. We will do our best to answer it. Thank you so much, Emily, for spending some time with us today and showing us the really interesting things that you're working on here. Rebecca, thanks for joining me today. I'm really glad that you guys came along for the ride to see this cool lab tour, and I hope you join us if we do something like this again. We probably will. Feel free to send in your questions, and I look forward to chatting with you all again soon.